8 days ago, Caden Orm lost his position in the Mornhall clique. He lost it according to the rules. Not a single clause of the contract was violated. On the day of the annual reassessment, his rank was simply revised. Previously, the paperwork had listed him as a rank E scout. Now it read rank F, cartographer. There is nothing below that rank in the College of the Codex Registry. Below that are only civilians. Caden was 19 years old. He'd been with the team for 14 months. His share amounted to 4% of the proceeds from the sale of cores. He owed the guild 3,200 marks for his equipment. No team accepts rank F members. Without a team, there's no access to passages above the second tier. Without access, there are no cores. Without cores, there's no money. Without money, you can't pay off your debt. Not paying off your debt means staying on the guild's list for the rest of your life. Not a single F-rank hunter has ever broken free from this cycle. But there was one thing neither Lenar Vist nor the Codex clerks knew. When Caden stepped through the mouth of a portal, the space inside unfolded in his mind as a blueprint. He called it an imprint. The imprint lasted exactly until he exited and faded away in about half an hour. It revealed the geometry. It didn't show what was inside the rooms, and it never matched the registry. The reevaluation took place in a hall on the second floor of the Codex building. The line had been forming since 6 in the morning. The appraiser placed his palm on the plate and read the line aloud. No one argued with the plate. The plate had never been wrong once in 60 years. When it was Caden's turn, the appraiser read the line twice. Then he called over the supervisor. The supervisor read it a third time. Then he wrote cartographer, rank F, on the form and stamped it. The hall fell silent. The cartographer class did indeed exist in the Codex Registry. In its entire history, 9 people had received it. Not a single one of them had lived to reach the second rank. Not a single one had earned more than the price of a decent jacket. The class was considered empty. It granted neither strength, nor speed, nor regeneration. It granted only what a person could already see with their own eyes. So it was written in the handbook. Caden left the hall with the sheet in his hand. Lenar Vist was waiting for him on the stairs. Lenar was the squad commander and a rank B hunter. He had held his position in Morn Hall for 11 years and feared losing it more than he feared any creature in the chasm. He said that the decision had not been made by him, but by the guild. He said that the squad's composition was evaluated based on its average rank. He said that a single F-rank member lowered the entire squad's average rank by 1 level and cost them the contract for the third tier. He spoke calmly. He didn't look at the sheet of paper in Caden's hand. Healer Sona Tay stood 2 steps higher and remained silent. The other 2 turned away toward the window. A debriefing was scheduled for that same evening. They weren't reviewing a reevaluation. They were reviewing a death. 3 days earlier, the squad had entered the Taven passage on the second tier. Caden had mapped out the route through the passage. He had been mapping routes for all 14 months, and in all 14 months, the wedge had not lost a single man. At the 4th hour, Scout Till Barn went ahead down the corridor and did not return. They searched for him for 9 hours. They did not find his body. The corridor was a dead end. The wall at the end was solid. The council recorded the cause as the scout's unauthorized departure. The guild recorded the cause differently. In the debriefing room, Lenar Vist placed a copy of the route sheet on the table and said that the route led to a dead end and that the dead end had not been marked as dangerous. He said that a person with an F-rank class was not authorized to the combat wedge blueprint. He said this calmly. He repeated it twice for the record. The 12 people at the table looked at Caden and waited for him to start making excuses. There was nothing to excuse. He stood up. He said that the wall at the end of that corridor was not solid. He said that it was 63 paces from the last turn to the wall, and that at the 61st pace, the floor dropped down by the thickness of a palm. He said that behind the wall was a void about 40 meters deep, and that it ran downward past the entire second level. He said that Till Barn had not wandered off on his own. He said that Till had been dragged behind the wall and that his body lay at the bottom of this void near the eastern edge. He said that this section is not listed in the vault's registry and never has been. There was laughter around the table. They laughed quietly and briefly. The assessor from the college recorded in the minutes that an F-rank hunter had reported the existence of an unregistered section and that the statement was unsubstantiated. Lenar Vist did not laugh. His cheek twitched for a second. He asked where Caden had gotten that information. Caden replied that he had seen it. Lenar asked how he had seen it. Caden did not answer. The hearing concluded a quarter of an hour later. The decision was recorded in a single line. Klin bears no responsibility. Settle accounts with Caden Orm immediately. The settlement was brief. The guild wrote off a debt of 3,200 marks. Caden waived his share from the last 2 runs and any claims related to the Till Barn case. They had him sign the document right away. He signed it. Lenar placed a second document next to it. It was a pass. According to the rules, the guild could not let a former hunter leave without any access at all. Formally, he was entitled to access at least one passage. The entry read, Kern. The Kern passage was located a 4-hour walk from the city, near an old quarry. 3 circuits, 41 rooms according to the registry. The cores have been completely removed, declared abandoned 8 years ago. In those 8 years, no one had entered except for bone dust collectors and 2 hunters who never came out. A pass to an abandoned passage cost nothing. It was handed out as a joke, and everyone at the table understood that. Caden folded the paper in 4 and tucked it into his shirt. Sonatai caught up with him in the courtyard by the gate. She was holding a bundle. Inside the bundle were 6 light rods and a coil of cord. She said she'd written them off as damaged. She said it was damp in Kern and that cheap rods went out there within an hour. She said she was sorry. As she spoke, she kept looking at his boots. Caden thanked her and walked toward the gate. He didn't tell her that the rods cost 40 marks and that this was exactly the amount he was short. In the morning, he went to the registry to register his single status. Clerk Overdent was sitting behind the counter. Overdent had worked at the registry for 22 years and had seen every class that existed. He read the form. Then he read it again. Then he looked up and asked if Caden was serious about going into the passage alone as a cartographer. Caden replied that he was. Overdent said that in 22 years, he'd issued solo permits to 8 F-rank hunters. He said 6 of them died in the first month. He said 2 died in the second. He said this without malice. It's the way people talk about the weather. The line behind him burst into laughter. A man in a leather vest asked loudly if the new solo hunter needed directions to the cemetery. They laughed for a long time. Overdent waited for the laughter to die down. He issued the permit and named the fee, 40 marks. Caden had 51. He paid and was left with 11 marks. Overdent looked at the coins and added a separate line to the form. He noted that the hunter had been warned and had refused an escort. They write such a line when they don't expect to see the person again. The journey to the quarry took 4 hours. It rained for the last hour. The mouth of the cairn stood in an old quarry and looked like a crack in the rock 2 human heights high. The edges were coated with a gray patina. The coating meant that the opening was dead and no longer growing. 2 men were sitting at the entrance. They collected bone dust and sold it to alchemists for a mark per sack. They looked at Caden's gear and immediately lost interest in him. One said that it was empty inside. He said there was nothing there but the grays, and that the grays were empty too. He said that not a single core had been taken out of there in 8 years. Caden nodded. He took out the sheet with the registry and read the lines again. 3 circuits, 41 rooms, depth 90 meters, 6 dead ends. He rolled up the paper and stepped toward the crack. He wasn't going to go in right away. He was just going to take a look. The pattern unfolded from the mouth of the fissure. He stepped over the edge, and the passageway opened up in his mind all at once. The first circuit lay out in an even grid, 12 rooms. The second circuit lay beneath it, 19. The third lay even lower, 10. 41 in all. The register was accurate down to the very last room. Caden stood there, looking at this neat blueprint. In 14 months, he hadn't seen a single opening that matched the register. Not a single one. He was just about to leave, and then the imprint reached the lower edge of the third outline. Right where all the documents indicated solid rock, a line began. It extended downward. It ran straight and didn't break off. It was longer than all 3 outlines combined. Caden took 2 steps back from the opening, and the imprint began to fade. He knew the time limit exactly. Half an hour to transcribe everything he'd seen onto paper. He sat down on a wet rock, took out a sheet of paper and a stylus, and began to sketch. The bone dust gatherers looked at him as if he were sick. He sketched the 3 contours according to the register. Then he sketched the line. The line began beneath the 10th room of the third outline and ran downward at a slight angle. It wasn't a corridor. It was too wide for a corridor and too straight for a crack. It had a beginning, but no visible end. Caden marked the entrance. Then he marked 3 spots on the first contour where the walls in the imprint looked thinner than they should. Then the stylus stopped. He realized something simple. He wouldn't make it there alone. The imprint showed where to go. It didn't show what was there. It didn't show how many grays were there, nor did it show if there was air. To reach the third contour, he'd need to carry water for 3 days, plus a supply of rods, a rope, a hammer, and a bag for loot. All of that weighs more than a person. A hunter with the combat class handles this through brute force. A hunter with the cartographer class can only manage this with a second person. Porters were being hired at the entrance to the quarry under a canopy. In the morning, there were 9 men standing there. Porters are paid 1 mark per day and half a mark for every sack they carry out. They don't fight, they haul. More of them die in the passages than all the others combined. Caden laid out the terms. The Kern Passage. 3 days, 1.5 marks per day. The first porter asked about his rank. Caden answered honestly, rank F. The mood under the awning grew lively. The second one said he wouldn't go into a death passage with a man who didn't have a single combat skill. The third said that for 1.5 marks, he wouldn't carry his own corpse. The fourth simply walked away. By noon, all 9 had refused. Caden stood under the awning, counting the remaining 11 marks. Then a woman stepped out from the far end of the awning. Her name was Mira Kell. She was 22 years old. She was a Class E porter. She owed the hiring agency 900 marks, and the debt was growing faster than she could pay it off because the agency deducted a penalty for every failed assignment. Everyone knew her. She was always the last to be chosen. 6 months ago, she had emerged from the Gueule Pass as one of a group of 7, and ever since then, she had been considered unlucky. Hunters are more superstitious than peasants. She asked if they paid in advance. Caden replied that he paid after the run. She said she'd go then. There was laughter under the awning again. Someone loudly wished them luck in lying down next to each other. Mira didn't turn around.
Caden wasn't looking at her. He was looking at her trail. The imprint didn't just work on stone. It read people, too. Not strength or character. It read the path they'd traveled. Everyone who walks through the passages leaves behind a trail of the corridors they've passed through. For Lenar Vista, that trail was thick and short. He had walked a lot, but always in the same places. For Till Barn, it was jagged. For the porters under the canopy, it was as thin as a thread. For Mirakel, the trail ran like a dense bundle and didn't fit within the boundaries of her body. She had passed through more corridors than all 9 of the rejected ones combined. She had passed through more than the commander of the Mournhall Wedge had in 11 years. Everyone under the awning saw an unlucky woman with a debt of 900 marks. Caden saw a person who, for 9 years in a row, hadn't left the passageways and had never stayed behind there even once. He said he'd take her on for all 3 days. He added that if she wanted to leave at any time, she'd be paid for the days she'd worked. Mira shrugged and went to pack her bags. They descended at dawn. The first level of Kern was exactly as the registry had promised. 12 rooms, low ceilings, walls covered in a gray patina. Dust lay in an even layer with no footprints on it. The gray ones were rare. The grays are the lowest form that remains in a passageway after everything of value has been taken from it. They're slow, blind, and cling to the walls. Mira took down the first one with a quick jab of her spear before Caden had a chance to raise his hand. She said that you strike the grays at the base of the neck and that every porter knows this. She said it without a trace of mockery. She simply stated it. Caden walked along, checking his notes. The outline matched the blueprint down to the last detail. He explained the bare minimum to her. He said he could see the passageway structure. He didn't say how. He said he saw only voids. He saw neither creatures, nor traps, nor anything lying in the room. Mira listened and asked a single question. She asked if he could see water. He replied that he could see any void and that water was also a void as long as no one was standing in it. She said that was enough. She didn't ask anything else for 2 hours. At the junction of the first and second circuits, Caden stopped. According to the blueprint, the corridor ran straight ahead and ended at a turn. Based on the imprint in the wall on the right, there was a thin lintel. Beyond it lay a void the size of a small room. This room had no entrance whatsoever. He counted 27 steps from the turn and placed his palm on the wall. The stone was colder than anywhere else. He took the hammer and struck. Mira only had time to say that hitting the walls in an opening was a bad omen. The wall caved in on the third blow. Beyond the lintel was open air. The air had been there longer than Caden had been alive and smelled of dry salt. He picked up the rod. The room was small, 6 steps by 7. In the middle stood a stone cube waist high. On top of the cube lay an object the size of a fist. It was black and didn't reflect light. A core. Caden had been working in the wedge for 14 months and had seen hundreds of cores. They all glowed from within. This one didn't glow at all. A body lay against the left wall. The jacket on it had rotted away to threads. A codex token remained on his belt. Mira picked up the token and read the number. She said the man had been listed as missing for 8 years and that she remembered the name because they'd talked about him at the recruitment office. She asked how he'd gotten in here if there was no entrance. Caden looked at the imprint and replied that there had been an entrance. It had been at the top and had been buried, so the opening was capable of closing the doors behind itself. He didn't say that out loud. He stepped toward the cube and reached for the core. The cube twitched. What Caden had taken for a rock unfolded into 4 plates and rose onto 4 legs. It was chest high to him and moved 10 times faster than the grays. The imprint hadn't shown anything like this. The imprint doesn't show living things at all.
The first blow struck Caden in the shoulder and sent him flying against the wall. He heard his own gear crack. Mira didn't scream. She dropped the bags, hurled her spear at the creature's feet, and threw her full weight onto it. She held the plates in place with her hands while Caden fumbled for his hammer. She held them for 16 seconds. Caden struck the seam between the plates 4 times. On the 4th strike, the creature collapsed. Mira's left palm was slashed down to the bone. Caden had a dislocated shoulder and a broken shoulder guard worth 210 marks. He took the core. It was heavy as lead and warm. It took them 6 hours to climb back up. At the mouth of the tunnel, Mira stopped and asked him point blank how he'd found out about the wall. Caden replied that that's how his class operates. She said that in 9 years she'd heard about the cartographer class exactly once, and that back then the whole office had laughed. She said she wouldn't laugh now. Then she said the most important thing. She said she'd seen hundreds of A-rank hunters pass by walls like these. She said that if he could spot it in every opening, then he wasn't useless. He was the most valuable person in this quarry, and that it was best to keep quiet about it. Caden paid her 4 marks 50 for 3 days and was left with 6 marks 50. He gave her the Fallen One's token so she could turn it in at the office and receive a finder's fee. In town, he went to turn in the core. The Arch's purchasing office accepts cores according to the price list. The appraiser behind the counter took the black stone and placed it on the scales. Then he removed it from the scales. Then he held it up to the plate. The plate showed nothing. The appraiser called over the supervisor. The supervisor called over another person. The 3 of them stood silently over the core for nearly a minute. Then the supervisor asked which passage the item came from. Caden replied that it was from Kern. The supervisor said that Kern had been mined out 8 years ago and that there wasn't a single core of that type in his registry. He said that no such type existed in any of the Arch's registries at all. He asked again, this time in a different tone, where it had come from. Behind the senior appraiser, against the far wall, stood a woman in gray. She had been standing there the whole time and hadn't approached the counter. She wasn't looking at the core. She was looking at Caden's hands. The appraiser noticed her gaze and immediately lowered his eyes to his papers. The woman in gray was named Helga Vorn. She owned the Vorn Appraisal House and 3 out of the 5 buying houses in this city. The codex set the price schedule. The Warren firm determined exactly what made it into the price list. Any core not listed in the registry first had to be reviewed by her appraisers, and only then was it given an entry. That's how it had been for 30 years. She approached the counter just as Caden was about to take the stone back. She said that the Warren house would take the find for inspection. She said the inspection would take anywhere from 9 days to a month. She said payment would be made only after the item was entered into the registry. Caden asked how much the core would be worth once it was entered. She replied that no one knew and that this was precisely why the procedure existed. He said he would take the stone and come back later. Then Helga Vorn turned to face the line. There were 11 people in line. Almost all of them were debtors to the hiring agencies and were turning in their daily earnings. She said loudly and calmly that an F-rank hunter with a car class has no skills whatsoever that would allow them to open a sealed cavity. She said that there were no cores in the excavated cavity and that this had been recorded in the report 8 years ago, signed by 3 appraisers. She said that the person who brought a core that doesn't exist from a cavity where there are no cores is either lying or took it from a corpse. She said this without looking at Caden. She was explaining this to the line of people waiting. The line listened attentively. Then someone from the back said that yesterday, near the quarry, he'd seen this guy hire the unlucky Kel. Loud laughter erupted. The appraiser behind the counter slid a rejection slip toward Caden and asked him to make room. Caden tucked the core into his shirt and walked out. He walked to the end of the street, and only then did he realize he was clutching the stone so tightly that his fingers were going numb. He unclenched his hand. He didn't go back. He sat down on a pedestal by the water fountain and began to count. He was better at counting than at fighting. He had 6 marks and 50. For a full 3-day run into the 3rd Circuit, he needed water for 2 people for 4 days, which cost 3 marks. 12 light rods, that's 24 marks. A 40-meter rope, that's 60 marks. A new shoulder strap to replace the broken one, that's 180 marks for the cheapest one. A hammer with a reinforced head, that's 45 marks. Payment for the porter for 3 days, that's 4 marks 50. Total, 316 marks 50. The difference came to 310 marks. He could earn that much in town in 4 months unloading cargo. In 4 months, anyone could find the line near Kern. There was one thing left. He'd inherited a prospecting permit from his father. The document was old and bore 2 seals. Permits like this were issued 40 years ago to those who mapped the first passages. The permit granted the right, once a year, to enter a new section into the Codex Registry under his own name and receive a share of all subsequent visits to that section. The right was inheritable. The right was non-transferable. His father hadn't used it even once in 19 years. He said he was saving it for his son. Collectors paid good money for such papers because there were few old seals left. Caden understood what he was selling. He was selling the only legal way to make his finds his own. With this document, the line under Kern could take his name. Without it, everything he found would remain merchandise that he'd have to sell on the black market. He thought about it for a quarter of an hour. Then he got up and went to the antiquities dealer's house on Litanaya Street. The dealer examined the seals at length. He offered 600. Caden said 800. They settled on 740 marks to be paid in 3 installments. He received the first installment right away, 300 marks. He stepped out onto the street with the money and a hollow feeling in his chest. Lenar Vist was waiting for him at the corner. He stood alone, without his dagger or breastplate. He said he'd been looking for Caden since yesterday. He said that yesterday morning, Svod had sent a search party of 3 into the Tavin Passage. He said the party had tapped their way through a dead-end wall at the 61st step, and that the wall turned out to be a false one. He said there was a vertical cavity behind the wall. He said they had found Till Barnes' body at the bottom near the eastern edge, at a depth of 38 meters. He said the site wasn't listed in the registry and that the board had opened a separate case. He spoke while looking past Caden. Caden asked why he was telling him this. Lenar replied that the debriefing report had already been filed and that no one was going to rewrite it. He said that if Caden went to the council with a complaint, they would raise the question of why a rank B wedge commander hadn't checked the wall himself. He said he had a wife and 2 children and 11 years of service. He said he was willing to pay. He named a sum of 500 marks. It was then that Caden understood the most important thing about his first enemy. Lenar Vist had crossed him off the list not out of contempt or greed. Lenar Vist had crossed him off because he was afraid. A man who can see right through walls is dangerous to those who cannot see them. Caden refused the money. He said he wouldn't file a report because he had neither witnesses, nor authorization, nor the time. He said Lenar could sleep soundly. Lenar nodded and walked away briskly. He neither thanked him nor apologized. At the gate of the recruitment office, Caden found Mirakel. She turned in her token and received a bonus of 15 marks, half of which was immediately deducted for downtime. Her left palm was wrapped in gray cloth. She said the wound was clean and that in 6 days she'd be able to hold a spear with both hands. She said she'd have to use just one hand until then. Caden said he was hiring her for the long term, 20 marks a month plus 1/10 of whatever they carried out. She was silent for a long time. No one ever pays porters a tenth. Then she asked if he understood that he would be taking on her debt to the agency if he signed her to a long-term contract. Caden said he understood. She said that in that case, she agreed. She added one more thing, saying it while looking at the ground. She said that 6 months ago, she had come out of the guild pass alone because she'd gone back for the sacks, and the group had moved on without her. She said that ever since then, she'd felt as if she'd abandoned them. She said that if Caden ever sent her back for the bags, she wouldn't go. Caden replied that they could leave the bags behind. He said you can't abandon a person. They never brought up that conversation again. He spent 2 days buying equipment. He bought a used shoulder strap, not new but refurbished, for 90 marks. He bought 30 meters of rope instead of 40. He bought the rods at a shop by the Eastern Gate where they don't ask about rank. He bought a hammer with a reinforced head from a blacksmith who made tools for stonecutters rather than hunters, so he paid half the price. He stayed within his budget of 244 marks. He had 62 marks left and a promise of 2 more payments of 220 each. A promise on paper is worth nothing until it's fulfilled. On the 3rd evening, he went out to the gate to check the package and noticed a man on the other side of the street. The man was standing against the wall and didn't move. When Caden walked toward him, the man stepped away from the wall and calmly walked into an alley. He didn't run. He wasn't even in a hurry. He was wearing a gray jacket without any insignia. Junior appraisers at the Vorn estate wear those. Caden didn't bother chasing after the spy. He returned to the courtyard and rearranged the sacks so that the empty ones were on top. In the morning, he left the city via the southern road instead of the western one and took a detour that added an hour and a half to his journey. Mira caught up with him at the bridge and didn't ask why. She only said that no one was following them and that she'd checked 3 times. She knew how to check. 9 years of working at the rear of the group had taught her to look back better than any scout. They reached the quarry around noon. The work took 19 days. The first cut, the second contour. Caden walks down the corridor, placing his palm on the wall every 20 steps. Mira holds the rod and says nothing. Over the course of 9 days, they uncover 11 cavities not listed in the vault's registry. 4 are empty. 3 contain dust and debris. 2 hold stone cubes, and both reveal creatures inside. They defeat the first creature together, and Caden gets a crack in a rib. Mira takes down the second one alone with 2 spear thrusts because she now knows where their joints are. 2 black cores emerge from the 2 rooms. In the 10th cavity lies not a core, but a thin plate of white metal with slits. Caden doesn't understand what it is. He wraps the plate in a rag and doesn't show it to anyone. Second cut. They spend the night on the first level near the wall. Mira dries her canvas on a rock and says that in 9 years, she's never once slept in the same spot twice. She says that all the groups she's traveled with were afraid of campsites. Caden replies that a campsite is safe if you know how many entrances there are to the room. He says there are 2 entrances to this room. He points out where the second one is, even though it's not visible. Mira stands up and finds a crack behind a growth. She sits back down and remains silent for a long time. Then she says she now understands why, in 14 months, his unit hasn't lost a single person. She says this isn't meant as praise. She says it's meant as an accusation against those who expelled him. Third cut. He begins selling not the cores, but the root. There's nowhere to sell the cores. The root can be sold to anyone. The quarry is always crowded with lone F and E rankers who can't get into the wedge. Caden offers them a route map to the first circuit of Kern. The sheet marks 4 empty cavities where one can spend the night and 3 spots where the greys gather in droves. The price is 2 marks. For the first 3 days, no one buys it. On the 4th day, an old man named Ren Dovitz buys it, a man who's been venturing into the caverns for 26 years and is still listed as rank E. He emerges a day later, alive and with a sack full of bone dust, because, for the first time in years, He didn't waste a day searching for a place to sleep. He tells his story under the awning. The next day, 7 people buy the sheet. A week later, Caden is selling 20 sheets a day and raises the price to 3 marks. 60 marks a day, more than a rank-and-file fighter's share in the Mournhall wedge. Fourth scene. He draws the sheets at night under the awning, and Mira sits beside him, counting the money aloud because she likes the sound. She sets aside her 10th share in a canvas pouch and doesn't spend a single mark. On the 18th day, she says that 420 marks remain until her debt to the office is fully paid off, and that for the first time in 6 years, the figure has gone down instead of up. She says this matter-of-factly. Then she goes to fetch water and doesn't return for nearly an hour. The reaction came from a place where Caden least expected it. Overdaunt arrived at the quarry in person. Clerk Savad, who hadn't left the building on Lithuania Street in 22 years, stood under the awning in city shoes, holding a stack of root sheets in his hand. He had bought them from the hunters with his own money at 4 marks apiece. He spread the sheets out on a barrel and demanded an explanation. He said that these sheets marked rooms that weren't listed in Kern's inspection report. He said that the report had been drawn up by 3 appraisers and that it had been sealed 8 years ago. He said that either the sheets were a lie or the report was a lie. There was no third option. Caden suggested he go down. Overdaunt descended into the opening for the first and last time in his life. He was 54 years old and was already breathing heavily by the first 100 steps. Mira walked ahead and removed the gray ones before he had a chance to see them. Caden led him to the turn on the second circuit, counted 27 steps, and pressed his palm against the wall. He said that behind the wall was a room 6 by 7. He said that the entrance to it was filled in from above. He suggested that Overdaunt tap on it himself. The clerk tapped. The sound was hollow. He tapped again 3 meters to the left, and the sound was muffled. He returned to the first spot and tapped a 3rd time. Then he sat down right on the floor in his dress shoes. He sat there for quite a while. Then he said that in 22 years he had issued 11,000 permits and had never once considered that the registry might be incomplete. He said that the registry was the only thing the Codex believed in. Back upstairs, he recorded the 11 cavities in his notebook based on Caden's account and asked for permission to have his people check them out. Caden gave his permission. Overdaunt said one final thing that turned out to be more important than anything else. He said that if the cavities were confirmed, Kern would have to be removed from exhausted status. He said that an exhausted passage belongs to the city, and anyone can enter it. But a passage with a confirmed reserve goes up for auction, and the auction is won by whoever has the most money. In 4 days, everything changed. Overdaunt's men had surveyed 6 of the 11 cavities and confirmed all 6. The council initiated a review process. People at the shelter stopped laughing and started greeting each other. The price of a route sheet on the black market reached 9 marks. Ren Dovitz offered Caden half of his earnings for the right to be the first to receive new sheets. Caden refused and continued to sell to everyone equally. By the end of the 2nd week, he had 430 marks in cash, 3 black cores, a white plate, and a second payment from the antiquities dealer. For the first time in half a year, he bought a hot meal, not counting the coin. Mira said that now they would definitely be noticed. She said this that same evening as they were returning from the shed. She said that at the employment agency, they'd asked 3 times that day who she'd been hired by. She said that before, no one had ever been interested in her name. Caden replied that they could have noticed them earlier. He was wrong about something else. He thought they'd come for the cores first. On the morning of the 19th day, a man wearing a Mournhall clan jacket was standing at the entrance to the quarry. He didn't approach. He just stood by the road and counted the hunters buying slabs. Caden recognized him. It was a scout named Had Vale, who had replaced the late Till Barn in the clan. He stood there until evening. Then he went into town. A day later, he returned and brought two others with him. By evening on the third day, a guild tent had appeared at the quarry, along with a sign stating that Mornhall was conducting a preliminary survey of the Kern Pass. They weren't conducting any survey. They were simply compiling a list of route sheet buyers. Caden realized that the chain of events had turned against him. The Codex would announce a review. The review would put Kern up for auction. The guild would win the auction. And then, a person with an F-rank class simply wouldn't be granted access to the passageway that he himself had brought back to life. He sat down that night with a sheet of paper and a stylus and began counting how many days he had left. According to the council's regulations, a review takes at least 40 days. That meant he had to make it down to the Third Circuit and reach the line before then. He looked up. Mira was standing at the entrance under the awning, holding a folded piece of paper in her hands. She said a boy from Liteinaya had brought it and that the boy hadn't taken any money for the delivery. There was neither a seal nor a signature on the paper. There was a single line. It stated that the House of Vorn had purchased Mirakel's debt obligation from the hiring office earlier that day. Caden read the line twice and placed the paper on the barrel. Mira stood there waiting. She already understood everything. A porter's debt obligation could be purchased from the employment agency without the debtor's consent. The new holder had the right to demand full repayment at any time. The House of Vorn had paid 420 marks for her debt and gained the right to send a bailiff any morning. Caden had 430 marks on hand. He could pay off the debt tomorrow and be left without equipment or supplies. He could choose not to pay it off and, at any moment, lose the only person who knew how to walk by his side. Helga Warren had no intention of receiving the money. She wasn't buying a debt. She was buying a leash. Mira said she would leave on her own and that it would be easier that way. Caden said she'd receive her payment for the long-term contract either way and that she could leave right now if she wanted. Then he said something else. He said that until the contract was terminated, he'd cover the debt, and that this was stipulated in the contract they'd signed at the office. He said the bailiff would come for him, not her. Mira sat down on the ground by the barrel and stayed there for a long time. Then she said that in 9 years, no one had ever bought her out, and that she didn't know how to act. The next morning, they went down to Kern earlier than usual. 40 days is 40 days. The third level began beyond a long, sloping tunnel and was a few degrees colder than the upper levels. The registry listed 10 rooms there. The scan showed 16. The line led downward from a dead end past the 10th room. Caden walked along, making notes. Mira walked ahead with a spear in her right hand because her left arm still wouldn't straighten completely. There were no grays on the Third Circuit at all, and that was worse than if there had been many of them. An empty contour meant that someone had recently passed through it. At the 4th hour, Mira stopped and raised her hand. She said she could smell a burnt wick. Cheap wicks burn with soot. They're used by those who can't afford proper ones. Caden turned the imprison around. People were moving through the gallery behind them. The imprint didn't show the people. It showed that the 3 spaces that had been empty 5 minutes ago were now occupied. The emptiness disappears when someone takes its place. He counted 4 of them. They weren't following them. They were already standing ahead at the gallery exit, blocking the only way back. There were 4 of them, and they were ranks E and D. 2 had spears, 1 had an axe, and 1 had a net. The one with the net spoke for the group. He said they needed the sheets. He said they needed all the sheets and drafts, and that in exchange, they would let both of them go back up. He said that the Vorn house paid 30 marks per sheet, and that it would be foolish not to share. He called it a friendly split. Caden asked point blank how much they'd been paid in advance. The one with the net hesitated for a second and replied that it was none of his business. The answer spoke louder than the words. They'd been paid. So Helga Vorn hadn't waited 40 days. So she'd realized that it wasn't the core she needed to buy, but the blueprint. Fighting was out of the question. A rank F against 4 wasn't a fight. It was a sure way to die. Caden did the only thing he knew how to do. He began counting aloud. He said that the tunnel behind them had an 11-degree slope, and that water had been flowing down it from the upper sections for 8 years. He said that on the right side of the wall, at waist height, there was a cavity 14 meters long, and that it was filled with water all the way to the top. He said that the bridge connecting the cavity to the tunnel was thinner than the palm of a hand. He said that anyone by the left wall, the water would reach your waist, but if you stood by the right wall, it would sweep your feet out from under you. He said he had a hammer in his hand. He wasn't threatening, he was just listing the facts. The one with the axe looked at the wall on the right and took half a step to the left. That half step was enough for all 4 of them to stop forming a wall. Mira struck first. She knocked down the spearman closest to the right wall and shoved him straight into the man with the net. Caden didn't swing his hammer at the people. He struck the wall. The bridge had held for 8 years, but couldn't withstand the 3rd blow. The water didn't pour out in a stream, but in a wall. It knocked 3 of them off their feet and swept them down the gallery for 24 steps. The 4th managed to catch hold of a ledge and stayed put. It was the one with the net. He was the first to get back up and threw the net not at Caden, but at Mira because she was standing closer. She caught the net with her spear and her left hand. The wound opened immediately, and the fabric on her palm turned black. She didn't let go of the shaft anyway. Caden ran up and struck the man with the net in the thigh with his hammer. The man sat down and didn't get back up. They didn't kill anyone. Caden took the water rods and knives from all 4 of them and left them 6 hours' walk up the way, at the turn where anyone could reach the mouth of the river without light and without good, but alive. He told them where it was. He said that if they ran into him in Kern again, he'd leave them without any rods at all. The one with the net clutched his thigh and kept repeating that they were just following orders. He gave a name. He didn't say Helgu Vorn. He named the junior appraiser at the Vorn estate, a man named Taze Croy, who had come to their flophouse and paid each of them 20 marks in advance. Caden wrote the name down on a sheet of paper. It took them 11 hours to make it upstairs because Mira was walking slowly. Rain met her at the mouth of the river. She sat down on a rock and only let him unwrap her hand after Caden had said 3 times that he wouldn't take her to the doctor without examining her first. The wound was bad. The bone wasn't broken, but the edges had splayed apart, and she couldn't make a fist. The doctor at the quarry charged 8 marks and said she wouldn't be able to carry sacks for at least a month. He said this in front of Mir. She looked at Caden and said that a month without work was a month of downtime, and that downtime was recorded as debt. Caden replied that the debt no longer belonged to the office. He replied that for 30 days, she would receive her 20 marks and a 10th share, regardless of whether she was carrying sacks or sitting on a barrel. She said that didn't happen. He said that now it did. That evening, he counted everything he had. 430 marks in cash. 3 black cores that no one would buy. A white plate whose purpose he didn't know. 14 days until the deadline for the second payment from the buyer. 29 days until the end of the review process. A porter with a disabled arm, and the line at the 3rd contour, 17 steps short of which he'd stopped. That morning, Overdant came to the shed. He wasn't wearing his city boots, but his hiking boots, and he was holding an opened package with a broken seal. He said the review procedure had been suspended. He said it was impossible and that in 22 years, nothing like this had ever happened. The suspension did not come from the Codex. It came from the Council, based on a recommendation from a specialized expert. He unfolded the sheet and read the expert's name aloud. Helga Warren had been appointed as the expert on disputed fines in Kern. And the second point in that same recommendation was a demand to submit all of Hunter Caden Orm's rough sketches to the expert within 3 days. Caden read the recommendation 3 times and returned the sheet to Overdant. 3 days. The expert's demand carries the force of a codex order. Refusal to hand over the schematics means revocation of his single-entry permit. Revocation of the permit means he will not be able to enter Kern at all, on any circuit. Overdant said that the decision could only be appealed through the college, and that the review of the appeal would take at least 2 months. He said this in an apologetic tone. For 22 years, he had believed in the registry and the procedure, and now the procedure was working against the one person who had shown him that the registry was incomplete. He said that the signatures on the submission were genuine. He said there was nothing he could do. Then he asked if Caden had anything left that could be submitted in place of the schematics. Caden replied that the schematics were in his head and that only rough drafts were on paper. Overdant left. Caden sat under the awning and began to think not about the schematics, but about Helga Vorn herself. He thought for half a day. He was pondering not her power, but her structure. The House of Vorn controlled 3 out of 5 buying houses and determined what made it onto the price list. The House of Vorn bought up the porter's debts. The Vorn house paid junior appraisers to hire hunters from the flop houses. All of this worked on one condition. Every find in this city had to pass through her hands before it was priced. She wasn't stronger than him. She was just ahead of him. For 30 years, she had stood between the find and the money, and no one had tried to bypass her. Caden realized one simple thing. He couldn't beat her at appraisal. He could make the appraisal unnecessary. He gathered 11 people under the awning. They were all F and E rank loaners who bought sheets from him. Ren Dovitz sat closest to him and listened more attentively than anyone else. Caden laid out not money, but paper on the barrel. He proposed an agreement. He said he would stop selling the sheets for marks. He said that from that day on, the sheets would be given out for free. In exchange, everything taken from the cavity marked on the sheet would be split evenly between the one who retrieved it and the one who marked it. He said he wouldn't take a single mark up front and that the share would be based only on the actual haul. He said that every transaction would be recorded in a communal ledger in the presence of 2 witnesses from among the hunters. It grew quiet under the awning. No one had ever offered anything like this. The guilds give a lone hunter a 15% share and deduct for equipment. Ren Dovitz asked why he was doing this. Caden answered honestly. He said that in 3 days his license might be revoked and that, if that happened, the only way he could continue working would be through others' hands. He said he had no intention of deceiving anyone and that he preferred to state his reason right away. His honesty had a stronger effect than any promises. 8 out of 11 men signed that very evening. By morning, 6 more had signed. That's how the book came to be. It was neither a guild nor a cooperative. It was a notebook with a canvas cover that Mira Kell kept with her healthy right hand, because with her left, she still couldn't even hold a spoon. She wrote down the name, date, cavity number, and extraction. She calculated quickly and made no mistakes. By the 3rd day, the book contained 14 names and 9 entries about extractions. Kaiden turned in the diagrams on time. He came to the Warren assessment house by himself and placed a stack of drafts on the counter. There were 40 sheets, all genuine, all with precise coordinates. All of them pertained to the 1st and 2nd circuits of Kern, where the cavities had already been confirmed by the people of Overdanta and had already been marked on the route sheets that circulated throughout the quarry. He had submitted what everyone already knew.
There wasn't a single sheet among them pertaining to the Third Circuit. Helga Warren sorted through the stack herself. She understood everything within a minute. She looked up and asked where the rest was. Kaiden replied that the briefing had specified to hand over the draft diagrams and that he had handed over all the draft diagrams that existed on paper. She asked if there were any diagrams that didn't exist on paper. He replied that he wasn't obligated to answer an expert's questions about the contents of his own mind. She remained silent for only a moment. Then she said calmly and almost expressionlessly that he was the second person in 30 years to try to talk to her. She said the first one had died the year before last of old age in a debtor's shelter. She said she harbored no personal animosity toward Kaiden. She said she simply could not allow a source of valuables she did not appreciate to appear in her city. She said this as if she were stating the obvious. Then she announced that the suspension of the review was being extended for another month. The blow came 2 days later, and it wasn't aimed at him. The House of Warren issued an order to all 5 of the city's pawn shops. Any find brought out of the Kern Passage would be accepted only upon presentation of a certificate of origin signed by an expert. The expert was not issuing any certificates. The dealers stopped accepting anything at all that came from the Kern, including bone dust. 14 people from the book were left with full bags and not a single buyer. Ren Dovi came under the awning with a sack on his back and poured the bone dust onto the ground. He said he'd been bringing it to the buyers for 26 years and that this was the first time he'd been told to go home. He didn't blame anyone. He just poured it out. Then Kaiden made a move that no one but Mira understood. He took 2 people from the registry and led them into town for 2 days. They didn't go to the buying posts. They visited alchemists, foundrymen, and leatherworking workshops, those who buy raw materials rather than finished products. Alchemists need bone dust directly. The gray patina from the walls is needed by foundrymen as a flux. The chitin from the gray creatures is used as a lining for armor. The Vorn dealers bought all of this for 1 mark per sack and resold it to the workshops for 3. Kaiden offered the workshops the chance to buy 2 sacks directly. The craftsman calculated faster than the hunters. By the end of the second day, he had verbal agreements with 9 buyers, and none of them went through the Vorn house. The income of 14 people doubled. The Vorn buyers lost their supply of raw materials from an entire quarry. Helga Vorn had blocked the river and failed to notice that there was land surrounding it. This was Kaiden's first truly major victory, and it lasted exactly 6 days. On the 7th day, a man appeared at the shed whom no one was expecting. He arrived on horseback, accompanied by 2 C-rank hunters. On his chest was a 3-stripe Mornhall Guild patch. He introduced himself as the Guild's assistant administrator, Garm Tell. He said that the Guild had reviewed the situation in Kern. He said that Mornhall considers the use of uninsured solo workers unacceptable. He said that the Guild had submitted a petition to the college requesting that the Kern Passage be temporarily assigned to Mornhall for the duration of the review suspension. He said the petition had already been granted. He unfolded the paper and hung it on a post under the awning. Starting tomorrow, entry into Kern would be permitted only with Guild passes. Passes would be issued to hunters of rank D and above. No passes would be issued to hunters of rank F. The notice hung on the post until evening. Everyone came to read it. The 14 people listed in the book stood around in silence. Mornhall passes were issued to hunters of rank D and above. Of the 14, only 1 held a rank D. Ren Dovitz took off his hat and said that in 26 years, this was already the 6th passageway that had been taken away from him. He said that usually, after that, he goes looking for another one. He said there wasn't another one nearby. Kaiden didn't take down the paper and didn't argue with the guards. He went under the awning and drew all night. In the morning, he did something no one expected of him. He didn't go to Kern.
He headed north along the spoil heap of the old quarry, taking Mira and Ren Dovitz with him. He explained as they went, "Openings don't hang in a vacuum. They grow within the rock, and they don't grow one at a time. A nest is a cluster of openings connected by a shared depth. The vault registers the entrance. The vault does not register what lies beneath the entrance." Kern's imprint showed a line sloping downward and to the southeast. If the line runs at an angle, it means it has length. If it has length, it means it could emerge elsewhere. Caden wasn't looking for an opening. He was looking for a second entrance to the same cavity. They walked 11 kilometers along the spoil heap. He stopped every 200 steps and stood motionless. Mira kept water for him and asked no questions. Ren Dovitz asked twice, and both times received the answer that they were looking for a hole that wasn't on the map. At 4 o'clock, right at the edge of the old mine workings beneath an overhanging slab, Caden stopped and wouldn't go any further. There was a crack the width of a palm. A chill emanated from it. There was no incrustation on the edges. The vault considers only what a person can pass through to be an entrance. This crack would never be recognized as an entrance. He placed his palm on the rock, and the imprint unfolded. It didn't just open up a little, it opened up completely. Beneath them lay a cavity more than 2 kilometers long. It ran southeast and ascended toward Kern. It passed directly beneath the third contour. This was the very line. And it turned out to have not 2 ends, but 9 branches. Caden sat down on the ground and stayed there for about 5 minutes. Ren Dovitz asked what he saw. Caden replied that he saw an opening 6 times larger than Kern and that it wasn't recorded anywhere. He said there was an entrance, but a person couldn't squeeze through it. It took 9 days to widen the crevice. First cut. Ren Dovitz brings 3 stonecutters from the village near the quarry. They aren't hunters. They've been chiseling rock their whole lives. Caden pays them 2 marks a day out of his 430. Second scene. The rock turns out to be layered and must be split with wedges rather than a hammer. A stonemason named Odd Varon finds a weak layer and removes as much in a day as the hunters in 4. Third cut. Mira, using her good hand, keeps the ledger and records, and on the 7th day, she notices that the water consumption doesn't match the number of people. It turns out that 2 stonecutters have brought their sons and are working together for a single wage because they're afraid the work will end. Caden enters the boys separately in the ledger. Fourth scene. The crevice becomes a crawl space. The crawl space becomes a passageway. On the 9th day, a man carrying a sack walks through it. The response came faster than expected, and from someone they hadn't anticipated. Garm Tell arrived alone, without an escort. He stood by the new passageway and watched as people carrying sacks emerged from it. He said that the securing of Kern behind Mournhall was in effect, and that attempting to bypass it through the neighboring entrance constituted a violation. Caden asked if the document specified the entrance's number. Garm Tell unfolded his copy and read it aloud. The document listed the Kern entrance's registration number and the coordinates of the entrance to the old quarry. Caden said he was currently standing 11 kilometers from that entrance. He explained that he was not in Kern, but in an unregistered cavity that had neither a number nor a status. He said that, according to the code's regulations, an unregistered site is open to anyone until it is entered into the registry. Garm Tell was silent for a long time. Then he said that he knew the regulations and that Caden was correct to the letter. Then he said something that Caden would remember for a long time. He said that in his 8 years working for the guild, he'd seen many people who'd circumvented the rules. He said that all of them had circumvented the rules with money. He said that this was the first time he'd seen someone circumvent a rule through geography.
He left without making any threats. He left to consider the matter. 2 days later, he returned with the guild administrator and a surveyor. By the end of the week, Mournhall had submitted an application to the college to register a new estuary in his own name. Caden learned of this from Overdaunt. The clerk arrived in the evening and looked pale. He said the application would be accepted. He said that estuary registration was processed on a first-come, first-served basis, and that Mournhall had been the first to submit his application. He said that Caden didn't have an exploration permit and that without one, he couldn't file an application at all. Caden remembered the document with 2 seals that he'd sold on Litania Street for 740 marks and kept quiet. Dent said that the registration process would take 19 days. That meant the cave would be up for grabs for 19 days. That meant they had 19 days to work. The 4 of them descended into the cavern. Caden, Mira, with Ren Dovitz's hand in her arm, and the stonemason Odd Varen, who had volunteered himself, saying he'd been chiseling stone from the outside his whole life and wanted to see what was inside. The cavern didn't look like an opening. It had no distinct contours. It ran as a single shaft with branches, and it was silent, without even the sound of dripping water. There were no gray ones. At the 3 o'clock position, they reached the first branch, and Caden stopped everyone. He said that further along the main shaft, 40 paces ahead, the floor narrowed to less than an elbow's width, with a 9-meter drop below. He said it wasn't a trap. He said it was simply a thin spot. He led everyone along the edge, hugging the right wall. Odd Varen tapped the floor with the hilt of his weapon along the way, and his expression changed. In the first branch stood columns, 8 of them. Between them, on the floor, lay a circle made of white metal with slits in it, just like the plate found on the second perimeter of Kern. Caden took out the plate and held it up. It fit into the recess as if it belonged there. The circle came to life, not with light, but with sound. A low hum rippled through the stone and lasted about 20 seconds. Then, a passageway opened in the far wall, one that hadn't been in the imprint or carved into the stone. The imprint had never shown anything like this. Caden stood there, staring at his golden rule, which had just stopped working. Beyond the passage lay a hall. The hall was dry. Along the walls were niches, and objects lay within them. Not cores, objects. Odd Varen raised his rod higher and was the first to say aloud what everyone was thinking. He said that this wasn't a passage. He said it was someone's dwelling. Caden didn't let anyone step inside for the first 5 minutes. He stood in the doorway and looked at the imprint. The imprint showed the hall as a void from the moment the passage opened. Before that, the hall didn't exist at all.
So the rule hadn't been broken. It had been clarified. The imprint sees emptiness. As long as the hall was sealed, it wasn't empty. It was part of the rock. Caden said this aloud, both to himself and to the others. He said that there might be other sealed rooms within this cavity and that he wouldn't be able to see any of them as long as they remained sealed. He said they should look for them not with their eyes or the imprint, but by following the circles on the floor. There were 22 niches. 14 contained dust. 6 contained objects made of the same white metal. A ring, 3 plates of different shapes, a rod an elbow's length long with slits running its entire length, and a flat bowl. The last 2 niches contained projectiles, not black, white, and so light they seemed hollow inside. Odd. Varen didn't touch anything and said there was a superstition in the quarry not to be the first to take something you don't understand. Ren Dovitz picked up the bowl, and nothing happened. Mira used her good hand to gather everything into a bag and recorded each item in the book on a separate line, noting the niche. She said that if anyone later argued about the find, let them argue with the record. On the way back, Caden stopped at the circle and tried to remove the plate. The plate came out. The passage closed instantly, and the wall became a wall again. He inserted the plate back in. The passage opened once more. So this wasn't a one-time mechanism. So it was a door. So the door had a key, and there might be more keys like it. He took the plate with him. Upstairs, news awaited them. While they were downstairs, a surveyor from Savod had arrived at the new passage and set boundary markers. He hadn't placed them according to Mornhall's request. He'd placed them along the boundary of the old quarry workings. Overdent arrived shortly after and explained. He said he dug up documents from 40 years ago and found that the dump site past the 11th kilometer had never been transferred to the city. He said the land belonged to the quarry. He said the quarry was closed, but its ownership hadn't been revoked. He said that Mornhall's application to register the mouth of the river on someone else's land required the landowner's consent. Caden asked who the owner was. Overdent replied that ownership had been inherited and that the owner lived in the village near the quarry. The owner turned out to be Odd Varen, a stonemason who was standing nearby, holding a rod in his hand. He himself didn't know this. He said that his father's father had worked as a foreman, that some paper had been left in a chest by his grandfather, and that he would have used that paper to start a fire if he could read. Mira went with him to the village and returned with the paper. The paper was genuine. Overdent read it in front of 3 witnesses and then sat down on a rock just as he had when he tapped the wall on the Second Circuit. He said that for 22 years he had been issuing permits and had no idea that a quarter of the quarry belonged to a man who quarried stone for 2 marks a day. Odd Varen thought it over for 2 days. Then he came to the shed and said he would not give his consent to Mornhall. He said he would give his consent to Caden. Caden refused. He said he would not take on the consent by himself. He proposed something else. He proposed entering Odd's land into the book as a share. He said that the landowner would receive 1/5 of everything extracted from the cavern, and that all 14 men would sign as witnesses. Odd Varen agreed. Thus the book ceased to be a notebook and became a legal document. Garmtel found out about this a day later. He arrived for the 3rd time, and this time he brought neither papers nor guards. He sat down under the awning and asked for water. He said that Mornhall's application would be rejected. He said he had already sent a report to the guild and that in the report he had written exactly what he had seen. Then he said the most important part. He said that the guild administrator had read the report and ordered a change in approach. He said that Mornhall was offering Caden membership. His rank F cartographer class wasn't an issue. The guild was prepared to hire him as a passageway surveyor, waiving the rank requirement. The salary was 200 marks a month, full equipment, insurance coverage for him and his people. Garmtel laid all this out calmly and added that he understood how it looked after the ban on entry. He said the guild didn't apologize. He said the guild made its calculations. Caden asked one question. He asked who would own the caverns he found. Garmtel replied that they would belong to the guild. Caden asked what the 14 people from the book would receive. Garmtel replied that there were porter positions available for them at the standard rate. Caden refused. He explained his reason aloud and in front of everyone because he understood that people would be talking about it. He said that he had been with the clan for 14 months and that during those months, the clan had not lost a single person. He said that whenever the clan lost a person, the blame fell on the one with the lowest rank. He said he would not go where his discoveries would belong to others and his people would be treated as expendable. He said this without malice. Garmtel listened and nodded. As he left, he said that the overseer would take the refusal badly and that things would now go differently. Things did go differently 4 days later. During those 4 days, they managed to clear everything out of the hall and open 2 more side passages. In the second one, they found another circle and another door, and behind it a narrow room with 4 niches. Word spread through the quarry on its own. The people under the awning stopped talking about cannonballs and started talking about white metal. By the end of the week, 40 people were standing at the entrance wanting to sign up. Caden accepted 26 and turned down 14. He turned down those who had thefts on their records at the hiring office. He told each one the reason to their face. 2 of them walked away cursing. On the 5th day, a letter arrived from the college. Overdent delivered it himself and did not open it. The letter was addressed to Caden Orm personally. Inside was a notice stating that the College of the Codex was convening an expanded meeting regarding the unregistered cavity 11 kilometers away. The meeting was scheduled for 6 days later. Caden Orm was summoned as the petitioner. Below that was the list of attendees. Guild Administrator Mornhall, Senior Appraiser of the Vorn House, and Helga Vorn, the specialist in disputed fines. For 6 days, Caden prepared not for a dispute, but for a presentation. He understood that he would have to speak not about the truth. He possessed the whole truth. He would have to speak about what he could put on the table. On the table, he could place a book with 40 names, Oddvaren's land deed, and 6 white metal objects. He could not put the most important thing on the table. He couldn't present his class. Class isn't something you show. Class is listed in the registry as a single line, and that line was against him. Mira took down the print 2 days before the hearing. Her hand clenched 2/3 of the way. She said she would go with him to the city and that she would keep the book herself because record-keeping was her job. Overdant arrived the day before and brought a copy of the agenda. He said the question was worded cunningly. The agenda didn't mention the status of the cavity. The agenda concerned the legality of a group's activities on an unregistered plot. He said that with such wording, the investigation would focus not on the discovery, but on the people. He said he'd seen such wording 3 times in 22 years, and that all 3 times had ended with the dissolution of the cooperatives. The meeting took place in a large hall on the 3rd floor of the building on Litainaya Street. 7 people were seated at the table. The Mornhall Guild's administrator, Aster Crow, sat on the right. Helga Warren sat on the left, with a stack of papers as thick as her palm lying in front of her. Caden was standing. Mira stood by the wall, holding a book. The administrator spoke first. He spoke briefly and to the point. He said that a group of 40 people was working in an unregistered area without insurance coverage. He said that 4 injuries had occurred there in the past month. He cited the figures precisely, and the figures were accurate. He said that the guild had offered the hunter Orm legal registration and had been refused. He said that in the absence of coverage, liability for any deaths would fall on the Codex. He proposed transferring the site to Mornhall under full coverage. He never once called Caden a fraud. He spoke of people and safety, and that was far more dangerous. Then Helga Vorn spoke. She placed the first sheet of paper on the table and said that the Vorn House had conducted an examination of 6 white metal objects seized as listed in the inventory. Caden felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't handed the items over to anyone. Helga Warren explained that the items had been submitted for analysis by a hunter named Ren Dovitz, who had turned them in to a scrap dealer 8 days ago. She pronounced the name matter-of-factly. Caden didn't turn around. He knew that Ren Dovitz was sitting in the 3rd row. 26 years in the voids and not a single successful year. He was offered the job, and he took it. She read the conclusion aloud. The metal cannot be identified using the Codex table. The artifacts have no counterparts in the registry. Dating is impossible. Next came the conclusion, and it was written very carefully. She said that objects of this type are never found in the passages at all. She said they are found in burials. She said that in 3 regions there are known burial mounds where similar artifacts have been found, and that the removal of objects from burials falls under a separate statute. She did not accuse him. She merely suggested it. She said she wasn't claiming that the hunter Orm had desecrated the burial sites. She said that, as an expert, she was obligated to point out that possibility. The courtroom grew noisy. Aster Crow looked at her with interest. He hadn't expected this move and clearly appreciated it. The presiding judge asked Caden what he had to say in response. Caden didn't answer right away. He looked at the stack of papers in front of Helga Warren and counted. He wasn't counting arguments. He was counting sheets of paper. He said he'd like to clarify one point in the report. He asked the expert where exactly each item had been found. Helga Warren replied that the source was indicated based on the words of the person who turned it in. Caden asked if the niche number was specified. She replied that the niches were not specified. Then Caden turned to Mira. Mira opened the book and read aloud 6 entries. Each had a date. Each had a niche number from 1 to 22. Each had 2 witness signatures. She read evenly and slowly, and the hall fell silent because an E-rank porter was reading. Caden said that there were never 22 numbered niches in a single row in the burial chambers. He said he was ready to lead any member of the college through the hall and show them all 22 niches, including the 14 where there was nothing but dust. He said that the items had been removed from niches 6, 11, 12, 15, 19, and 20. He said that if the expert went downstairs, she could check each one. Helga Warren replied that she was under no obligation to go downstairs. Caden replied that in that case, her conclusion was based on the word of a single person, whereas his book was based on the signatures 40. The chair asked for the book to be passed to the table. Mira passed it over. While they were leafing through the book, Aster Crow asked the question that Caden had been waiting for most and feared most. He asked how an F-rank hunter found 22 niches in solid rock. He asked this without sarcasm. He asked as someone who was paid to do this. The room fell very quiet. Caden understood that everything depended on the answer. Telling the truth meant declaring his class to be functional. Then they would stop considering him empty and start regarding him as an asset. Remaining silent meant confirming any version of a story. He chose a third option. He said he would demonstrate. He asked for a blank sheet of paper and a stylus. They gave them to him. He asked the chair for permission to conduct an experiment. Permission was granted. Caden asked if anyone in the room had been in the Taven passageway on the 2nd level. An appraiser from the college who had handled the case of Till Barnes' death stood up. Caden sketched a diagram of the dead-end corridor on the sheet of paper. He marked the turn. He counted 63 steps. At the 61st step, he marked a dip in the floor about the thickness of a palm. He marked the false wall. He sketched a vertical cavity behind it and noted a depth of 38 meters. He made a mark at the eastern edge and wrote that a body had been lying there. He handed the sheet to the assessor and asked him to cross-check it with the search team's records. The assessor read the sheet for quite a while. Then he said that the figures matched perfectly. He added that the floor subsidence in the trio's report was listed as 11 centimeters and that no one knew about this detail except the 3 people who had measured it. Caden said that he had identified this wall 4 days before it was found, and that there was a record of this in the Morin Hall wedge debriefing protocol. He asked for the minutes to be brought forward. The minutes were brought forward. They were bound and had not been rewritten. They contained a line stating that an F-rank hunter had reported the presence of an unregistered area and that the report was not supported by any evidence. Aster Crow read the line and gave Caden a long look. Then he announced aloud the decision of the meeting. He said that in his 11 years as administrator, he could not recall a single instance where a hunter had specified the depth of an unregistered cavity to within a meter 4 days before its discovery. He said he considered the matter of excavating the burial sites closed. He said he proposed resolving the issue of the group's legal status differently. He did not propose disbanding the group. Instead, he proposed assigning the site to landowner Odd Varin, with mandatory insurance coverage and the right to engage the group under contract. The board voted 5-2. Helga Vorn voted against the proposal and did not say another word for the rest of the meeting. Caden stepped out onto the street as the victor and didn't realize it until a block away. Mira was walking beside him with a book tucked under her arm. She said that now the whole city knew that an F-rank hunter could see through stone. Caden stopped. Until that moment, he'd thought he protected his people. Now he realized he'd done exactly what Mira had advised him never to do. He'd shown the 7 members of the college, the guild administrator, and a packed hall exactly what he was capable of. Lenar Vist was waiting for him on the corner. He was pale and not wearing his breastplate. He said he'd been waiting since noon. He said he had to warn him and that after this, they'd be even. He said that yesterday, a request had arrived at the Morn Hall Clinic from the capital. He said the request hadn't come from the guild or the college. He said the request had come from the registry office, and that it demanded complete information about the hunter Caden Orm, including records of all his route sheets for 14 months of work in the Wedge. Caden asked Lenar if he knew what the registry office was. Lenar replied that he knew only one thing. In 11 years, requests from there had come to Morn Hall twice. The first time was after the collapse on the 4th tier, where 40 people died. The second time was when a guild from a neighboring region announced the discovery of a new level and ceased to exist 3 months later. He said that inquiries from the administration are never about people. They're always about openings. He said that if the administration asks about a person, it means that person has become an opening. He left without saying goodbye. Caden returned to the quarry and, first things first, gathered the book. He told them everything as it was. He said that his class was now known in the capital and that he didn't know how this would end. He offered anyone who wanted to leave the book the chance to do so now without losing their share of what had already been extracted. No one left. Odd Varin said that the land was his and that he wasn't going anywhere. Mira said that even without the book, she had nowhere to go. Caden spoke with Ren Dovitz separately and in private. The old man came on his own. He made no excuses. He said that the House of Vorn had offered him 200 marks and a job as a guard at the buying station. He said he was 51 years old, that he'd been going down into the shafts for 26 years, and that his knees could no longer handle the descent. He said he'd taken the money and wouldn't claim he'd been forced to do so. Caden asked one thing. He asked if Ren knew that the items would be used as evidence against him. Ren replied that he didn't know, and that if he had known, he wouldn't have taken them. Caden believed him. He crossed Ren's name out of the ledger and didn't withhold his share for the past. He said that the entrance to the cavern was closed to him and that he held no ill will. Ren Dovitz nodded and left. He didn't show up at the quarry for 11 days. Work continued as usual. Odd Varin arranged for insurance coverage, which cost 320 marks in one go. The contract with the group was drawn up in the presence of Overdante. The cavern was assigned a number and a name. It was registered as Lower Varin, after the landowner's surname. Caden insisted on this himself. He knew his own name could not appear in the registry as long as his father's permit had been sold. In 18 days, they had excavated 6 of the 9 branches. The first cut. The plate functions as a key, but does not fit all the rings. Of the 4 rings found, it opens 2. Caden begins to try them out. He notices that the slits on the plate form a pattern and that the pattern mirrors the arrangement of the columns in the hall. Second cut. The ring from the first niche fits the 3rd ring. Behind the door is a room with a 60-meter-deep well in the floor, far beyond the reach of the light. Caden lowers a rod on a rope, and the rod goes out at the 40-meter mark. He refuses to go down and forbids the others from doing so. Third scene. In the fifth branch, they find bodies. There are 4 of them. Their equipment has completely decayed, but they are carrying knives bearing a mark not found in the city's workshops. Overdent takes the mark to the arch and returns 3 days later with an answer. The mark belonged to a guild that worked in this area 190 years ago. Fourth segment. Mira keeps track of the accounts and on the 14th day presents the tally to Caden. The haul over 18 days totaled 3,400 marks in gross weight. The group share is 2,000. Odd's share is 480. His own share is 920. For the first time in his life, he has more than 1,000 marks at once. He makes his third payment to the antiquities dealer ahead of schedule and buys back his father's permit for 900. The dealer charges a markup of 160 marks, and Caden pays without haggling. The document with the 2 seals is tucked back into his coat. He doesn't mention this to anyone except Mira. She asks why he spent it all at once. He replies that now he can register 1 plot of land in his own name. He says he won't register Lower Varen because it's already been registered. He says he's saving the right for whatever he finds under the well. The skeptic came on his own this time and was someone Caden hadn't expected. Had Vale, a scout from the Mournhall clan who a month ago had stood by the road counting buyers of sheets, came to the awning without his insignia. He said he had left the clan. He said that after the college's meeting, he could not remain there. He said that for 14 months he had followed Caden's roots without realizing it, because Lennar had brought them and passed them off as his own. He said he only found out about this when the debriefing report was read aloud in the hall. He asked to be entered into the roster as a regular runner without a rank. Caden asked him directly if he'd been sent there. Had Vale replied that if he'd been sent, it would have been done differently and that he couldn't prove anything? Caden took him on a trial basis, on the condition that for the first 3 runs, he would go with Mira and do whatever she said. Had Vale was a rank C. Mira was a rank E porter. He agreed without a word, and that settled the matter. The blow came on the 19th day, and it didn't hit the mark. Garm Tell arrived to deliver the warning in person, coming in the middle of the night. He said he wasn't speaking on behalf of the guild. He said the House of Warn had filed a new petition with the college. Not about the fines, about insurance coverage. The petition states that the coverage is in the name of the landowner, Odd Varen, who is illiterate and incapable of assuming contractual liability. Attached to the petition is a report stating that Odd Varen's signature on the contract was a cross made in the presence of witnesses, and that, according to regulations, a cross requires notarization. No such notarization was provided. Garm Tell said that this was true. He said that the contract had been drawn up in a hurry and that Overdant had not checked it. He said that if the contract were voided, the entire group of 40 people would find themselves working without coverage, and that the site would then be shut down immediately, with no right to appeal. He said that the deadline for filing an objection was 3 days. Caden asked why he was saying this. Garm Tell replied that Administrator Aster Crow had ordered them not to interfere. He said the guild had decided to wait and see who would stand their ground. He left before dawn. Caden woke up Mira and Odd, and the 3 of them sat up until morning. There was only one notary in town, and he worked at the Vorn estate. The next closest one was in the regional center, a 2-day journey away. 3 days is 3 days. 2 days there and back left them 1 day for everything else. Odd Varen said he'd sign whatever was needed if they showed him where. Mira said you can't learn to write in a single day. Caden said there was no need to write. He said the regulations required a notary to certify the cross. He said the regulations didn't prohibit signing a name instead of drawing a cross. He said Odd needed to learn to write not his whole name. He needed to learn to write 4 letters. They taught him all night and all the next day. Odd Varen held the stylus like a chisel and broke it 3 times. By evening on the second day, he had written his name 12 times in a row, all identically. The objection was filed 2 hours before the deadline. Attached to the objection was a new copy of the contract, signed in his own hand. Overdaunt accepted it personally and certified it with his signature as an official of the Codex who had been present at the signing. He said that for the first time in 22 years, he was going against the expert's recommendation, and that he felt strangely good about it. The Vorn family's appeal was rejected the next day. Caden learned of this by the shed and, for the first time in a long while, sat down and simply sat there. Mira brought him some water. She said they could go down to the well now. She said it before he had a chance to think of it himself. In the morning, they gathered a 70-meter rope. Caden went first, Hadvale second, and Mira third. At the well, Caden secured the rope and looked down. The scanner showed nothing. He descended 30 meters and realized why. The walls of the well were lined with the same white metal. The metal muffled the signal just as felt muffles sound. At the 42nd meter, the rod went dark, and Caden lit a second one. At the 63rd meter, his feet touched the floor. He was standing in a circular chamber. Right in front of him, in the wall, was a passageway, and the passageway was open. A man lay at the threshold of the passageway. His gear was intact and hadn't disintegrated. A vault token hung from his belt. Caden raised the rod higher and read the number. The token had been issued 4 months ago. The token had been issued 4 months ago. Caden read the number 3 times. Then he looked at the body. The gear was intact. The jacket hadn't disintegrated. The soles of the shoes weren't worn down. There wasn't a single wound on the body. The man hadn't died from a creature or a fall. He was sitting with his back to the wall and his face toward the open passageway. A canteen stood nearby. The canteen was empty. Caden picked it up and shook it. Dry. The man had died of thirst 6 hours' walk from water and 63 meters underground. He hadn't climbed back up because it was impossible to do so. There was no rope on the wall. There were no hooks in the rock. He had descended and stayed there. Caden searched the body. A leather folder lay in his breast pocket. Inside the folder was a piece of paper. It was an official document bearing a seal that Caden had never seen before. Registry Administration. Below was the text of the directive. Hunter Neil Ardo was to conduct a survey of the deep section and compile an inventory without notifying the local branch of the Codex. The date was in the upper corner. It was a week earlier than the day Caden first stepped through the crevice past the 11th kilometer. Caden sat down on the floor next to the body and remained there for quite a while. This didn't look good. It meant that the Registry Administration knew about the cavern before he did. It meant that they had sent a man here alone and without a rope. It meant they weren't looking for that person. He tucked the paper and the token into his shirt. Then he picked up the rod and looked at the passageway. The passageway was open and had been open for a long time. The walls behind him were lined with white metal from floor to ceiling. Caden stepped inside, and the imprint didn't change at all. There was no void. He was standing inside the void, and it wasn't registering. He took 4 steps back, and the imprint returned. He stepped forward, and the imprint went dark again. The metal muffled him just as he felt muffles sound. Then Caden did what he'd done during his first months working at the clinic, back when he still didn't trust himself. He began counting his steps. He walked down the corridor, counting aloud and keeping his palm against the left wall. 28 steps. Turn right, 19 more. The corridor led into a circular hall. The hall was large. The rod wasn't long enough to reach the opposite wall. A circle of white metal ran across the floor, and this circle was 3 times larger than the ones he'd seen above. There was no recess for a plate in the center of the circle. There were 6 recesses. Caden took out the plate and held it up. It didn't fit into any of them. He walked around the hall along the wall. The far wall wasn't made of stone. It was divided into cells. There were many cells. Caden counted 112 and stopped counting. Each compartment was sealed with a flat cover made of the same metal. He tried to pry one open with his knife. The knife slipped and left a scratch on the metal. The metal was softer than steel and wouldn't yield to it. Caden stood in front of the wall for a little while longer and then headed back. He didn't touch anything. It took him 40 minutes to climb up the rope. At the top, Hadevale and Mira pulled him up. He caught his breath and told them exactly what had happened. Hadevale asked about the body. Caden handed him the token. Hadevale read the number and said that tokens of that series were issued not to hunters, but to officials. He said he'd seen one like it once on an inspector who'd visited the clan 4 years ago. Mira recorded everything on a separate page in her notebook. She wrote down the token number, the date of issuance, and the number of compartments. She said the paper shouldn't be carried in one's pocket and that it should be copied 3 times and distributed to different people. Caden did just that. Oddvaren took 1 copy. Overdent took the second. Mira sewed the 3rd copy into the lining of her jacket. Overdent left for the city with the original and returned 2 days later. He wasn't pale. He was gray. He said he'd submitted a request using the token number to the general department. He said the reply came that same day and that it was brief. Hunter Neil Ardo is listed as being on official business in the capital. There is no record of him being in the region. Overdent said the man had been lying at the bottom of the well for 4 months already, and that, according to the paperwork, he was currently in the capital and receiving a salary. He said that in 22 years, he had never come across a single false entry in the registry. He said that now he had. He sat down on a barrel and was silent for a long time. Then he said he would file a report. Caden asked him not to. He explained simply. He said that if the Bureau had sent a man in secret and hadn't searched for his body, it meant the Bureau didn't want the cavity to be found. He said that a report from the local office would show them where to look. Overdant agreed and didn't file the report. He turned out to be only half right. There was no longer any need to search. The work continued for another 9 days. First section. Caden descends into the well twice more, counting his steps both times. He draws a map of the deep chamber based on his count rather than on a footprint. Hadevale goes with him and counts along with him. Their counts match to within 3 steps. Hadevale says that for the first time in 9 years as a scout, he's doing the same thing a cartographer does, and that the only difference is in speed. Second survey. They try all 6 white metal objects they found on the 6 notches of the large circle. The ring doesn't fit. The bowl doesn't fit. The 3 plates don't fit. The slotted rod fits into one of the notches and slides halfway in. It won't go any further. So there are 6 notches and they need 6 keys. That means they have 1. Third cut. Mira calculates the costs. The descent into the well takes 40 minutes one way, which amounts to 2 hours of work time per trip. She suggests installing a gate with a drum mechanism at the edge of the well. Oddvaren builds the gate in 4 days using a timber beam and an old quarry cable. The descent is reduced to 9 minutes. Fourth scene. A woman in a travel cloak approaches the shed. It's Sona Tae. She left the Mornhall Guild a week after the college meeting. She stands by the barrel and doesn't come any closer. She says she heard in town that 40 people are working here without a guild or a clan. She says she doesn't believe it. She says she's seen work crews fall apart and that they all fell apart by the 3rd month. Caden doesn't argue with her. He shows her the book. Mira reads aloud the entries from the past 2 months. 42 names. 109 incidents, 4 injuries, not a single fatality. Sona Tae reads the pages herself and remains silent. Then she asks who their healer is. Mira replies that they don't have a healer and that, for 2 marks, a man from the village comes by when he has time. Sona Tae closes the book. She says she's staying. She says she won't take a cut and that she'll work for a fixed wage because she doesn't want to depend on someone else's luck. 2 days later, she takes a cut like everyone else. She said that at the clinic, they paid her 110 marks a month. In the first 9 days, she earned 140. It was only then that Kaden understood the most important thing about her. 6 months ago, she had brought him 6 light rods and said she'd written them off as damaged. She'd lied. She'd bought them with her own money. He didn't ask any questions. The convoy arrives on the 10th day, coming from the northern road. There were 14 of them, 12 in identical gray jackets without insignia, 1 surveyor with a tripod, and a woman on horseback leading the way. She dismounted by the awning and didn't greet anyone. She was about 40 years old and carried herself with the poise of someone who'd spent many years speaking to those who were obliged to listen. She presented a document bearing the same seal that had been in the dead man's folder, the registry office. She introduced herself. Inspector Ursa called. She said that, effective immediately, the Nizhny Varan plot was being placed under restricted access. She said that all work was to cease immediately. She said that the ledger was being seized for inspection. 2 men in gray jackets walked toward the shed. Mira clutched the book to her chest with her good hand and refused to hand it over. Had Vale stepped between her and the administration's men? Odd Varan picked up the chisel from the ground and didn't say a word. Ursa called, raised her hand, and her men stopped. She looked at Kaden and asked which one of them was Orm. Kaden stepped forward. She studied him for a few seconds. Then she said she had expected to see someone older. Then she said she had one question for him and that a great deal depended on the answer. She asked if he had gone down into the well at the bottom of the cavern. Kaden replied that he had. She asked if he had seen anything there. Kaden took Neil Ardo's token from his bosom and placed it in her palm. Ursa called, looked at the number. Her expression did not change, but something else about her did. She stopped standing upright. Ursa called, held the token in her palm, and did not move her hand. Then she closed her fingers around it. She ordered her men to stand guard at the passageway and not let anyone go up or down. She no longer ordered them to confiscate the book. She told Kaden to follow her. They walked about 40 steps away from the canopy toward the dump. She asked where the body was. Kaden replied that it was at the bottom of the well, near the entrance to the passageway. She asked if there were any papers with the body. Kaden replied that there was one, that it had been made in triplicate, and that the copies were with 3 different people. Ursa called said that was sensible. She said it without sarcasm or a threat. Then she asked a question that had nothing to do with the body. She asked how many passages Kaden had seen from the inside in his lifetime. He replied that there were 41. She asked in how many of them the registry matched what he had seen. He replied that in 1, in compass, and even then, only along 3 contours. Ursa called nodded as if she had been expecting exactly that number. Then she took a sheet of paper out of her bag and handed it to him. On the sheet was a list, 9 names. Opposite each name were 2 dates. The first date was the reclassification to the cartographer class. The second date was the removal from the registry of the living. Kaden calculated the difference. The longest period was 11 months. The shortest was 17 days. At the bottom of the list, a 10th name was written in fresh ink. Kaden Orm. The reclassification date. There was no second date. Ursa called took the sheet back and said it didn't scare him. She said she was just showing him her work. She said she'd been working at the registry office for 19 years and that she kept records of rare classes. She said all 9 had died in openings where the walls were lined with white metal. She said that in all 9 cases, the cause of death was recorded as an accident. She said none of the bodies had been brought upstairs. Caden asked why they hadn't been brought out. Ursa called replied that she didn't know. She answered honestly, and that was worse than any explanation. She offered him what she was supposed to offer: a transfer to the capital, a rank review under special procedures. The cartographer class is removed from the general scale and assigned a service category, a salary of 400 marks a month, security detail, access to restricted records. In exchange, the area beyond the 11th kilometer would be transferred to the administration's restricted jurisdiction and closed off. Caden asked what would happen to the 42 people listed in the book. Ursa called replied that the restricted area did not allow for the involvement of outsiders. She said they would be paid 3 months' compensation. Caden asked how much. She replied, 30 marks per person. He calculated aloud. 1,260 marks for all of them. In 2 months of work, the group had earned 14,000. He refused. He didn't refuse immediately or sharply. First, he asked if they would seal the well. Yrsa called replied that the well would be sealed. He asked if Neil Ardo's body would be removed. She paused and replied that the decision to remove the body was made in the capital. Then he refused. He said that the man had been lying there for 4 months and that his office still listed him as alive. He said he wouldn't work for people who listed their dead as alive. Yrsa called listened and didn't try to persuade him. She said she was obligated to carry out the order and that the site would be closed anyway. She added one more thing. She said the offer remained valid for 20 days and that in 20 days, many things become clearer. The closure took place the next morning. Agents from the administration placed a wooden shield at the entrance and affixed a seal. Work came to a halt. 42 people were left without a place to move. Odd Varan approached the shield with a piece of paper in hand and demanded an explanation of how the restricted status applied to private property. He was told that the restricted status took precedence over ownership and that compensation for the land would be determined separately. Odd Varan said that the land was not being leased and that he had not given it to anyone. He was told that his consent was not required. He left and did not argue any further. That evening, he told Caden only one thing. He said that he had been chiseling away at the stone from the outside for 20 years and that he had managed to look inside. He said that was enough. Then they began counting the days. First cut. The group has been idle for 4 days. Mira keeps track of the remaining funds. There are 640 marks in the communal fund. That's enough to feed 42 people for 8 days. After that, people will start leaving. Second scene. Caden sends everyone who can walk out into the surrounding area to look for other entrances. In 4 days, they cover 26 kilometers along the spoil heap and find nothing. He explains why. The cavity runs southeast at an incline and has 2 exits. One is at the 11th kilometer, and it's sealed off. The second is beneath the 3rd contour of cairn, and they fell short of it by 17 steps. Third scene. Caden heads into town to see the guild administrator, Aster Crow. He goes to ask for something he never intended to ask for. He requests permission to enter Kern. Aster Crow receives him immediately, without delay. He says that the temporary assignment of Kern to Mournhall expired 9 days ago, and that the guild did not renew it. He says he sees no point in keeping open a passage where a man who does not wish to work for the guild is operating. He issues Caden a one-time pass in his own name and charges 0 marks for it. He says this isn't a gift. He says he'll see who sticks around. Fourth cut. Hadvale prepares to descend through Kern. He was a scout for 9 years and knows how to navigate the contours quickly. He shortens the route to the third perimeter from 6 hours to 4. Mira is walking third. Her hand is already clenched completely. Sona Tae brings up the rear, carrying the canvas and ointment. Odd Varen carries a chisel and hammer because those 17 steps aren't to be walked, they're to be chiseled through. And around the same time, the second half of the plan fell apart. Overdaunt arrived in the evening and brought the transcript. He said he'd requested a list of the Registry Administration's regional offices. He said the list was public and that no one was hiding it. He said that simply no one had ever looked at it. Number 9 on the list was the Vorn Appraisal House, a contract for expert support regarding disputed fines. Term, 31 years. Caden sat down, and it all clicked into place in a minute. Helga Vorn wasn't greedy. She was the first filter. For 31 years, everything that was brought out of the portals in this region first went to her. Ordinary items were entered into a ledger and assigned a price. Unusual items received nothing and were sent to the capital. She didn't stop him from trading. She stopped him from finding what shouldn't be found. And she didn't sign the suspension of the review to take Kern away. She signed it to keep Caden up there. He told this to Mira. Mira listened and said something simple. She said that if the House of Warren was a contractor for the administration, then Ursa Called had known everything about them from the very beginning. She said that the inspector hadn't come because of Overdaunt's report or because of rumors. She had come because she had been tipped off in advance. Caden understood that. He didn't understand the rest. Ursa Called showed him a list of 9 dead people. Someone who came to shut down a site doesn't show lists like that. The answer came at night, and it came on its own. Ursa Called approached the shed alone, without her people. She sat down on a barrel and asked for water. She said she had looked into the case of Neil Ardo through her own channels. She said that the order to descend without notifying the local office had been signed by the head of the Deep Exploration Division. She said that this division had been officially disbanded 11 years ago. Then, she placed a copy of the order on the barrel and pointed out the signature. The signature belonged to a man named Hiron Ost. She said that Hiron Ost was her immediate supervisor and that he was the one who had signed off on her assignment here. She said that the signature on Ardo's order had been affixed a week before the day the records office first learned of the cavity's existence. She said she had been on the job for 19 years and that for the first time, she didn't understand who she was working for. She finished her water and stood up. She said she couldn't remove the seal from the passageway. Then she added that the seal was only at the entrance past the 11th kilometer and that her orders made no mention of a second entrance. They left the quarry before dawn. There were 6 of them. Caden, Mira, Had, Vale, Odd, Varen, Sona, and Tay, along with the young stonecutter Tev Varen, who was Odd's son and was turning 17. His father had taken him along himself and said the boy needed to see what he lived off of. The mouth of the cairn greeted them with dry weather. The bone dust gatherers were the first to greet them. 6 months ago, they hadn't noticed Caden at all. The descent took 4 hours. Had Vale led the way along his shortcut and didn't make a single mistake. The third circuit was still cold and empty. Caden led everyone to a dead end beyond the 10th chamber and stopped. He said there were 17 steps of rock ahead and a tree trunk beyond them. He said the rock was layered and that they had to go from below. Odd Varen examined the wall and agreed. The work took 2 days. First cut. Odd and Tev take turns striking with wedges. They switch every 40 minutes. Had Vale carries the rock out in sacks and stacks it in the 10th room. Mira keeps track of the sacks. Over the first day, they cleared 9 paces. Second cut. The rock changes and becomes denser. The wedge stops holding. Odd Varen switches to chiseling from below and props up the vault with a beam they carried in themselves. He sets up 4 supports and says they didn't bring any more. He says 4 will be enough as long as they don't strike from above. Third cut. On the second day, Sonate speaks for the first time ever about a matter not her own. She says the vault in the passage is producing fine dust and that, in the wedge, this was considered a sign of progress. Had Vale confirms this. Odd Varen listens to both of them and adds a fifth support beam from the spare supply. Fourth cut. By evening of the second day, only 2 steps remain. Odd Varen forbids continuing work at night and says that a tired man in the tunnel is as good as dead. They sleep for 4 hours right at the dead end. On the morning of the third day, the wall is gone. It didn't crumble into fragments. It collapsed entirely, opening a man-sized passage. Beyond the passage was a shaft, the very same one. Caden stepped over the edge and the image unfolded immediately. The 2-kilometer-long cavern was as familiar to him as the palm of his hand. He saw the shield and the seal 11 kilometers away at the far end. He saw the administration's people up above the shield. There was no one inside the cavern. They went in. It took them half a day to reach the shaft. The gate was still in place, and the cable was intact. Caden went down first. Had Vale followed. What they'd been working toward all along was about to begin. Caden walked down the white metal corridor, counting his steps. Had Vale counted along with him. They emerged into a large hall. Caden approached a circle with 6 notches and took out a rod with slits. He inserted it into the recess where the rod fit halfway in. Then he did what he'd figured out during the 9 days of downtime. He turned the rod. It was stiff and turned a quarter turn. A rumbling sound echoed through the stone. Not like the one upstairs, lower and longer. It lasted almost a minute. One of the compartments in the far wall opened. One of the 112. Inside lay a flat white metal plate with slits along the edge and rows of notches. Caden picked it up. The notches weren't decoration. They came in groups, and the groups repeated. Had Vale looked over his shoulder and said it looked like a route map? He said that back in the wedge they used to mark turns the same way when they ran out of paper. Caden held the plate against his palm and realized a second thing. The slits along the edge of the plate matched the slits on the key plate. The tag wasn't a description, it was the second key. He inserted it into the adjacent slot and turned it. 3 more compartments opened. Each one contained an identical tag. He opened 6 compartments in an hour. Then he stopped and counted. 6 keys for 6 slots. 112 compartments. Each new tag unlocked the next ones. This wasn't a treasure trove. It was a system. Someone had compiled an inventory here and locked it away so it couldn't be taken piece by piece. Upstairs, things had gone wrong while they were downstairs. Mira was the first to hear it. She was standing by the gate and heard the sound of something striking the wood inside the trunk at the far end. The administration's people were removing the shield on their side. Not because they'd found out about the second entrance, because Hiram Ost had sent an order to retrieve items from the inner chamber. Ursa Called had received it that morning and couldn't refuse to comply. Mira gave the rope 3 sharp tugs. It was a prearranged signal. Caden made it up in 9 minutes. He brought 6 tablets with him and left everything else behind. They were met halfway down the shaft, 12 men in gray jackets. It wasn't Ursa Called leading the way. Leading the way was Taze Croy, junior appraiser of the House of Vorn. He was wearing the same gray jacket and had no insignia. He said that the items were subject to seizure and that resistance would be met with consequences. He held out his hand. Caden handed him 1 tablet, the one that no longer opened anything. Taze Croy took it and demanded the rest. Then Odd Varen stepped forward and said he was standing on his own land. He said this calmly and loudly. He said that the document bearing 2 seals was in the codex and that the land belonged to him down to the last stone. The administration officials did not argue. They devoted forward. There was no fight as such. There was a scuffle in the narrow passage where it was impossible to turn around. Had Vale knocked two people down? Mira took a blow with the butt of a weapon on her left shoulder. Sona Tae grabbed Tev Varen by the jacket and shoved him against the wall. And in the midst of this scuffle, one of the gray-clad men struck the post. It wasn't on purpose. He'd simply stepped back and braced himself against it with his back. It was the fourth bar out of 5. The arch in the base shattered instantly. Odd Varen heard it first, because he'd been hearing sounds like that for 30 years. He shouted for everyone to get back toward the hatch. He didn't shout his name or call for his son. He simply called out the direction. Then he stepped under the arch and braced his shoulder against the shifting support beam. He held it in place while 4 people passed by him. He held it while Tev Varen dug his heels in and refused to move, and while Sona Tae dragged him by the collar. He held it while 3 of the administration's men passed by, running in the same direction as everyone else. He held it long enough. Then the vault gave way. Caden dragged Tev out last and managed to get 4 steps away. Rock lay in a solid mass behind them. Dust hung in the shaft for half an hour. When it settled, it became clear that the passage into Kern was completely blocked. There was no longer a way back through the third perimeter. Odd Varen remained buried under the rubble. They didn't dig him out. There was nothing to dig out and no reason to do so, and everyone understood that. Tev Varen sat by a rock and said nothing for 2 hours. Then he stood up and said that the land was now his. He didn't say it as an heir. He said it as a man who had accepted the job. They emerged at the far end of the shaft, past the removed shield. The administration's people walked alongside them, and no one bothered anyone. Ursa Called stood by the passageway and counted those coming out. She counted twice. Then she asked where the landowner was. They answered her. She turned to Taze Croy and said one sentence. She said that the seizure order had been carried out to excess and that she would draw up a report. Taze Croy replied that he had acted according to the Warren House's instructions. He said this in front of 15 witnesses and did not realize what he had said. Ursa Called recorded this statement verbatim. Then she approached Caden. She didn't ask about the plaques. She asked how many compartments there were in total. He replied that there were 112. She said that the administration's inventory for this facility listed 112 items and that the inventory had been compiled 40 years ago. She said that, until today, she had considered this inventory to be a fabrication by a defunct department. Ada Verena was buried without a body. In the village, near the quarry, they set up a stone and carved her name and 2 numbers into it. All 42 people from the book came. The stonemasons came, Overdaunt came in his city boots, Ursa Called came and stood to one side. Tev Varen carved the letters himself and didn't let anyone else use the hammer. Mira wrote in the book on a separate line that the landowner's share would remain the same and pass to the heir. She read this line aloud, and all 42 people confirmed it by raising their hands. That evening, Caden sat down and did what he had been putting off for 2 weeks. He laid out the 6 tablets on a barrel and began to examine the notches. He spent 4 days examining them. First observation. He noticed that the notches came in groups of 3, and that the first group on each tablet was different, while the last group was the same. He surmised that the last group was a mark of ownership. Second section. He compares the notches along the edges of all 6 tablets with those on his own plate. The notches form a single pattern when arranged in a circle. The pattern mirrors the layout of the 8 columns in the first branch. Third section. Head Vale recalls that in the wedge, routes were marked with 3 symbols: tier, outline, room. Caden tries reading the groups of notches in the same way and, on the third tablet, makes sense of them. Tier 4. No outline. 19 rooms. No passage with these specifications exists in any of the vault's registers. Fourth section. Ursa Called arrives on the fourth evening and brings a copy of an inventory from 40 years ago. She places it next to the plaques. The inventory's entries match the notches perfectly. The administration's inventory was compiled based on these plaques. This means that 40 years ago, someone had already stood in this hall and read them. That means he made it out alive and reached the capital. Ursa Called said the author of the inventory was listed, Vesk Ohm, class, cartographer. He was fourth on her list of 9. Next to his name was a second date, 2 months later than the inventory date. She said she now understood how it worked. A person goes, the person makes the inventory goes upstairs. The person is locked up downstairs. She said this flatly and without emotion, and it was more terrifying than a scream. She said she'd submitted a report directly to the college, bypassing her own department, and that the report had been accepted. She said that Hiron Ost had left the capital and would be here in 6 days. Caden asked what she was going to do. Ursa Called replied that she didn't know. She said that for 19 years she had kept records of rare species and that all those years she had considered herself the one who protected them. The descent was scheduled for the next morning. The 4 of them, Caden, Hadvale, Mira, and Tev Varen, were going to make the descent. Sonate remained upstairs by the gate. Ursa Called said she would come down as well and that her people would stay upstairs. She said she wanted to see the hall with her own eyes before Ost arrived. Taze Croy was no longer among her people. He had left for the city on the 3rd day after the collapse and hadn't returned. At the gate, they were met by a man no one was expecting. Ren Dovitz stood at the edge of the well in a scrap dealer's jacket, holding a canvas bundle. He didn't approach them first. He waited for them to come to him. He said he wasn't there for a cut or to be added to the ledger. He said that during his 11 days as a guard at the Warren estate, he had walked through the warehouse at night and seen the inventory of confiscated items. He said that the 5th item on the inventory was a white metal rod with slits, seized from the Kern Passage 8 years ago. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a rod an elbow's length long, exactly like their own. He said he'd taken it out last night and that he wouldn't be coming back because they'd take him to court for it. He said he'd been going into the passages for 26 years and that in all those years, no one had ever left him a share after he'd been driven out. He said he didn't know how to pay his debts any other way. Caden took the rod. Mira recorded it in the book as a separate entry and noted where it came from and who brought it. She wrote it down verbatim because keeping it a secret was worse than admitting it. They spent 11 hours down there. Caden placed both rods and both matching tablets into the circle. 4 notches out of 6. He rotated them one by one, trying to figure out the order. On the 9th try, the order clicked into place. A rumble sounded so loud that the dust on the floor quivered. The cells opened in rows. Not all of them. 61 out of 112 opened. Hadvale and Tev Varen carried the plates to the well and placed them in sacks. Mira counted and recorded the compartment numbers on the spot. Ursa Called read the markings along with Caden, and she read quickly because she knew the inventory by heart. By 7 o'clock, they had gathered everything. The plaques did not describe treasures. They described openings, over 200 of them. Each listed a level and the number of rooms. Some matched the Codex's registry almost exactly. Some matched only partially. 49 didn't match anything at all. Ursa Called looked up and voiced what had become the main conclusion of the whole story. She said that the Codex's registry wasn't compiled by the hunters. She said it was copied. She said that 190 years ago, someone made a copy of these plaques and didn't copy them completely because they couldn't open all the compartments. Everything that didn't fit into the copy became a mystery to people. Dead ends, false walls, Rooms without entrances. They weren't hidden. They simply weren't transcribed. Caden stood there, holding in his hands the very reason his class had been deemed empty. A cartographer isn't needed where people believe the map is complete. The collapse began at 22 o'clock. Not in the shaft, in the hall itself. A circle with 6 notches sank into his palm and pulled the floor with it. Caden realized it a second before it became visible. He shouted for everyone to head for the well. Mira made it. Tev made it. Had Vale shoved Ursa Called into the corridor and left himself? Caden was last, carrying the bag of tags. A floor slab rose up 4 steps ahead of him, cutting off the corridor. He turned and ran along the wall of cells toward the far end. The fingerprint scanner wasn't working. He counted his steps and counted aloud. 18, 26, 31. On the 34th step, the floor gave way beneath his left foot, and he fell onto his side, the bag slipping from his hand. He struck his ribs against the edge of a slab and felt a crack where a fissure had been 6 months earlier. He didn't lose consciousness. He lost his bearings. In the darkness without a reference point, a person becomes completely blind. He lay there and heard the rock settling. Then he heard a voice. Ren Dovitz was rappelling down the rope and shouting the count to him. He was shouting numbers. 28 to the turn, 19 to the chamber. He was shouting the very same numbers that Caden had said aloud in his presence many times up above. Numbers the old man had memorized because for 26 years he'd been memorizing other people's routes by ear. Caden crawled toward the voice. He crawled for 40 minutes, and the whole time Ren Dovitz kept counting without stopping. At the well, Hadvale and Tev pulled him up. They hauled him up by the collar. Ren Dovitz lifted the bag of tags. He was the last to be pulled up, and when they pulled him out, his right hand was crushed by the slab he'd held in place to get through the sona. Tay worked on him for 6 hours and saved 3 of his fingers. Caden came to at dawn in a tent by the shelter. His ribs had been set. He could breathe. Mira sat beside him with a book on her lap. She said the tablets were upstairs and that there were 61 of them. She said the hall downstairs had completely collapsed and that the shaft had been filled in to a depth of 40 meters. She said no one would go down there anymore. Then she said one last thing. She said that a quarter of an hour ago, 11 horsemen had ridden up to the quarry. She said that a man in a capital city cloak was riding at the head of the group, and that Ursa Called had gone out to meet him and called him by name. Hiram Ost had arrived 2 days ahead of schedule. Hiram Ost entered the tent alone, unescorted. He was nearing 60. He took off his gloves and sat down on a crate across from the cot. He said he was glad to see Hunter Orm alive. He said it without mockery, and that's why it sounded the worst. He didn't speak like an enemy. He spoke like a man who had been repairing the same car for 30 years. He said that the Deep Exploration Division had indeed been disbanded. He said it had been disbanded formally, but that its work had not ceased for a single day. He explained why. He said that there were 41 registered portals in the region and that 8,000 hunters were active in them. He said that the 49 unregistered passages meant another 10,000 people who would go there without maps, without insurance, and without guilds. He said that in the 11 years he'd held this job, there hadn't been a single major cave-in in the area. He said that before he arrived, there had been a cave-in on the 4th level and that 40 people had died in a single hour. He said that closed passages weren't a matter of greed. It's silence. Caden asked about the 9 cartographers. Hiram Ost answered directly. He said that none of them had been killed. He said that each had been offered a position and that each had refused. He said that after a person refused, they were not removed from the shaft and were not searched for. He said that this is called inaction, and that inaction leaves no trace on paper. He said that over the course of 11 years, he had signed 4 such orders. He said he would have signed a 5th. He offered Caden the same terms that Ursa Called had offered, and added one more thing on top of that, a rank review and a class-level service category. 800 marks a month, a personal access point for his own use, and the complete closure of the case regarding Odd Varen's death, with no consequences for anyone. Caden listened until the end. Then he asked one thing. He asked how much 49 access points were worth if they weren't traded. Hiron Ost didn't understand the question. Caden explained. He said that everything hinged on one thing. A secret has value only as long as it's known by a single person. He said that the 9 cartographers were paid not because they were dangerous, but because they were expensive. He said it was possible to make them cheap. Hiron Ost replied that opening 49 passages would send thousands of people to their graves. Caden agreed. He said that it wasn't the passages that needed to be opened, it was the map that needed to be revealed. He stated this in front of 6 witnesses and asked that it be recorded verbatim. Mira took notes. By evening, he got up from his lounger and walked over to the shelter. Things moved quickly from there. The committee gathered at the quarry on the 4th day because Caden couldn't travel to the city with his broken ribs and because transporting 61 tablets was more dangerous than transporting 7 people. The meeting took place outdoors under the canopy. 7 people sat at the table. Aster Crow arrived alone and brought 2 of his appraisers with him. Helga Warren arrived last. Ursa Called presented a report on the list of 9 cartographers and on the order issued to Neil Ardo. Overdent presented a statement confirming that the Warren household had served as the contractor for the disbanded department for 31 consecutive years. Mira presented the book. As of that day, the book contained 42 names, 309 entries regarding land claims, and 1 entry regarding the death of a landowner. She read for 2 hours, and no one interrupted her. Then Caden spoke. He placed his father's research permit, bearing 2 seals, on the table. The document granted the right, once in a lifetime, to enter a new plot into the Codex Registry under one's own name and to receive a share from all subsequent claims. He said that he would not be entering a plot. He said he was registering an inventory. He proposed that the college accept 61 tablets and recognize them as the primary source for the registry. He proposed reconciling them with the current Codex Registry and publishing a consolidated list as a public record. He said that the share from usage under his authorization is set to 0. He said that he is waiving it in writing and permanently. Aster Crow asked why he would do that. Caden replied calmly and briefly. He said that as long as the map is in one person's possession, it's more profitable to kill that person than to hire them. He said that an open map is worth nothing, and therefore no one will pay for it, and no one will be locked away underground. He said that 9 people died for the lines he is proposing to post on the wall of the Codex for free. Hiron Ost objected once. He said that a public list would drive people into unprepared passages. Then Caden laid out his second proposal. He suggested making the entire list public and restricting access by level. Each passage on the list would be assigned a level of exploration. 0 means that no one has entered, and entry is permitted only to a group accompanied by a cartographer or with a complete description in hand. He said that the description should not be prepared by a single person or by the administration. He said it should be done by people just like him from the lower ranks, and that they should be paid by the line item, not by rank. He proposed adding a new entry to the Codex Registry, not a class, but a job. A description of the site as paid labor with a fixed rate and a mandatory second person in the team. Overdant raised his hand and asked to speak. He said that for 22 years he had been issuing clearances and believed that the registry was the only thing worth trusting. He said that 6 months ago, one person had shown him that the registry was incomplete. He said that he was now asking for a correction not to a single entry, but to the entire book. He said he was ready to resign from service that very day if the amendment passed. The vote took a long time. It passed 6-1. Helga Warren voted against it. Next came decisions regarding individuals, which took another 2 days. The case concerning the death of Neil Ardo was referred to a separate proceeding. Huron Ost was suspended from his post for the duration of the investigation and traveled to the capital on his own word. He never denied the allegations, and this was taken into account in his suspension. Irsu Kald was left in the region as a temporary custodian of the consolidated list. She stated that she would accept the position only with the right of free access for the group from the book. This right was recorded. The House of Vorn's contract for expert support was terminated. Helga Vorn lost the contract she had held for 31 years. She retained her purchase rights. Caden did not demand any of them. He demanded something else, and he demanded it in writing. He demanded that the House of Warren, as the region's largest appraiser, sign the consolidated list on equal footing with the college and the codex and commit to appraising any find according to the open table. She signed. She signed in front of everyone, without a word. She understood what this meant better than anyone present. For 31 years, she had stood between the find and the price. Now, she had become one of the signatures on a rule she hadn't written herself. Taysa Croy was found in the regional center 9 days later, and he testified about the gun and about hiring 4 people at the flophouse. Lenar Vist came to the quarry on his own on the 8th day. He brought a copy of the investigation report from 14 months earlier and asked for a correction to be made. He dictated the wording himself. He said that the cause of Scout Till Barnes' death was a false wall not marked in the Codex registry, and that Hunter Orm's statement had been deemed unfounded due to the fault of the Wedge commander. He signed it and did not wait for thanks. He left Mournhall a week later and departed the region. Caden did not try to stop him and said nothing in his wake. Till Barnes' body was removed from Taven on the orders of Ursa Kald and buried according to all the proper rites. They were unable to recover Neil Ardo's body. The well was filled in to a depth of 40 meters. 2 names were carved side by side on a stone near the village: Odd Varen and Neil Ardo. Different people, different agencies, but cut from the same cloth. Mira Kell paid off her debt to the hiring agency in full that same month. Caden offered her half of the share as recorded in the ledger. She refused and said she would take a third plus the books. She kept the books for another 9 years. Ren Dovitz stayed at the entrance past the 11th kilometer and took orders with his left hand. He memorized the entire consolidated list for his region and recited it to newcomers for free. Had Vale led the teams and, a year later, was listed in the compendium as the top guide in the region. Sona Tay set up a medical station under the awning and took her share like everyone else. Tev Varen remained a landowner and didn't sell a single plot. He carved letters into stone and updated them himself on major dates. The consolidated list was published 4 months later. It was slim, 206 lines. Opposite the 49th line stood 0. It was posted on the wall by the entrance of the building on Litanaya Street, and anyone could read it without paying a single mark. In the first month, 11 people died, according to the list. Caden knew this would happen and had mentioned it to the Collegium in advance. In the second month, 4 died. In the third, 2. By the end of the year, 11 cartographers had arrived in the region. Not 9 and not 10, 11 alive. They were found all over the country, among loaders, clerks, and porters. The cartographer class was removed from the bottom line of the scale and listed as a separate entry. Rank F remained with it. Caden had insisted on that as well. He said that rank equaled combat strength, and that he had never had any combat strength to begin with. He said he had no intention of calling himself something he wasn't. A year after all that, he went down to Kern alone. The blockage in the third perimeter had been cleared over the summer, and the shaft was open again. He passed through the first perimeter, right past that very bridge on the 27th step. The room beyond it now had a number and a sign. He passed through the second perimeter and descended to the third. He reached the manhole and stopped. 200 people were working above the quarry. Mira was sitting under the awning, writing. Ren Dovitz was standing at the entrance, explaining to 4 boys how to read the surveying degree. Inside the shaft beyond the manhole, 2 surveyors with a measuring tape were walking and counting their steps aloud. Caden stood there and listened to the counting. It sounded like his own voice from a year ago. He stepped over the edge, and the layout unfolded in his mind as a precise blueprint. It was accurate down to the very last chamber. For the first time in his entire life, what he saw inside matched what was written on the outside.